My name is Harper Parker. I was halfway through a flight from Denver to Boston when the woman beside me started staring. Not rude staring, terrified staring. Twice she looked like she wanted to say something. Twice she stopped herself. Then right before landing, she turned to me and asked, "Was your mother Linda Parker?" My heart skipped. I said yes. The woman's hands started shaking. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. A newborn baby was wrapped in a yellow blanket. A woman stood beside the crib crying. And the baby looked exactly like me. That's when the stranger whispered 7 words that changed my life. "I don't think your mother is." The woman beside me started staring before the plane even left Denver. Not constantly, just enough for me to notice. Every few minutes, I'd look up from my laptop and catch her looking at me. Then she'd quickly look away. At first, I assumed she thought she knew me. By the end of the flight, I wished that had been the reason. About an hour into the flight, turbulence hit. My sleeve slid back while I reached for my coffee. The woman suddenly froze. Her eyes locked onto the small crescent-shaped birthmark near my wrist. I'd had it my entire life. Never thought much about it. But her reaction was immediate, almost frightened. Then she looked out the window and didn't speak for 20 minutes. That was my first warning. Eventually, she broke the silence. "Business trip?" I nodded. "Conference in Boston." She smiled politely. Then came another question. "Did you grow up in Colorado?" I frowned. "Mostly." She seemed disappointed by that answer, almost like she'd been hoping I'd say somewhere else. I didn't know why. When the flight attendant handed back our boarding passes after a gate issue, the woman glanced down. She saw my name. Harper Parker. Something changed in her face. Color drained from it. Real fear. Not curiosity. Fear. And suddenly I wasn't the only one paying attention anymore. Twice she opened her mouth. Twice she stopped herself. By then I was becoming uncomfortable. The woman wasn't acting crazy. She was acting like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump or walk away. The captain announced our descent. Passengers started putting away laptops. Phones came out. Seatbacks went upright. Then the woman turned toward me completely, for the first time all flight, and quietly said, "I'm sorry." Because people don't usually start normal conversations that way. Then she asked, "Was your mother Linda Parker?" Every muscle in my body froze. Nobody guessed my mother's name. Ever. I stared at her. "How do you know my mother?" The woman's hands began trembling. She looked down at her lap, then whispered, "Because I spent 30 years hoping I'd find you." And suddenly nothing felt normal anymore. She reached into her purse, carefully, slowly, then pulled out an old photograph. The picture was faded. Early 90s. A newborn baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. A woman stood beside the crib crying. Another woman stood behind her, watching. Because I recognized that second woman immediately. It was my mother. I flipped the photograph over. There was handwriting on the back. A date. My birth year. My birth month. My birth week. Not close. Exact. Then I noticed something else. Written underneath. Baby A, no name. No Harper. No Parker. Just Baby A. The woman watched my reaction carefully, like she already knew what was coming next. The woman finally introduced herself. "My name is Marianne Cole." I nodded slowly, trying to process everything. Then she said something that made my heart stop. "My sister gave birth the same night your mother did." Silence. Long silence. Then she added, "Only one family left with a baby." The plane touched down, but neither of us moved, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who I really was. Neither of us went straight to baggage claim. Instead, Marianne and I ended up sitting in a quiet airport cafe. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I needed answers. Maybe because she looked like she'd been carrying this secret for years. The moment we sat down, she slid the photograph across the table. "I've carried that picture for 30 years. I believed her. The edges were worn smooth from being handled too often. For the first time, Marianne said her sister's name. Rebecca Cole. She smiled sadly. She was 24 when she got pregnant. Then the smile disappeared. She never stopped talking about her baby. Something in her voice made my chest tighten, because this wasn't a woman chasing a fantasy. This was grief. Old grief. The kind that never leaves. According to Marianne, Rebecca went into labor at a small private clinic outside Denver. Complications happened during delivery. Rebecca was heavily sedated. Hours later, a doctor told her the baby hadn't survived. No baby, no funeral, no goodbye. Just a short explanation and paperwork. At least, that's what everyone believed. Marianne stared into her coffee, then quietly said, "My sister asked for a death certificate." I frowned. "Didn't she get one?" Marianne shook her head. "No." That single word changed everything, because even I knew that wasn't normal. The more Marianne talked, the stranger the story became. Rebecca claimed she heard a baby crying after the doctor told her the child was gone. Nobody believed her. Not the nurses, not her family, not even her husband. Everyone blamed medication, shock, grief. But Rebecca never changed her story. Not once. Then Marianne asked a question. "What date do you celebrate your birthday?" I told her. Immediately she looked away. My stomach dropped, because she wasn't surprised. She was disappointed. Then she whispered, "That's not the date Rebecca wrote down." By now, Marianne knew things she shouldn't know. My mother's name, my birth year, my birthday, my birthmark. Then she quietly said, "Your mother's maiden name was Linda Harrison." I nearly dropped my coffee, because very few people knew that. And suddenly I realized something. This woman wasn't guessing. I left the cafe and stepped outside, then called my mother. She answered immediately. "Harper?" Her voice sounded normal, comfortable, safe, for about 5 seconds. Then I asked, "Mom, have you ever heard of Marianne Cole?" Silence. Complete silence. And suddenly I wasn't talking to the same woman anymore. Mom didn't sound angry. That would have made more sense. She sounded scared. Really scared. Then she asked, "Where are you?" Not, "Who is Marianne?" Not, "Why are you asking?" Just, "Where are you?" That frightened me more than any answer could have. I told her about the flight, the photograph, the conversation. Then came a long pause. Long enough for me to hear her breathing. Finally, she said, "Harper. Some people spend their lives inventing stories." Then she hung up. Seconds later, I tried calling back. No answer. Again. No answer. Then I noticed something strange. My messages weren't delivering anymore. For the first time in my life, my mother had blocked me, and I couldn't stop wondering why. I stared at my phone in disbelief. My mother had never blocked me before. Not after arguments, not after disagreements, not after anything. Yet 30 minutes after I mentioned Marianne Cole, I couldn't reach her. That wasn't denial. That was panic. And panic usually has a reason. An hour later, my father texted. Not called. Texted. "Do not meet with that woman again." That was it. No explanation, no questions, no concern. I typed back immediately. "Why?" His reply came almost instantly. "Because she wants something." I read that message 3 times, because it sounded rehearsed, like he'd already discussed it with Mom. That evening, Marianne sent me an email. Attached were scanned copies of old letters. Dozens of them. Letters her sister Rebecca had written over the years, some addressed to hospitals, some to lawyers, some to government offices, all asking the same question. What happened to her baby? And every letter ended without an answer. Halfway through the stack, one sentence stopped me cold. The baby had a small crescent-shaped mark near her wrist. I looked down at my arm, at the birthmark I'd ignored my entire life. My throat went dry, because that detail was never public, never shared. And Rebecca wrote it 30 years ago. Marianne called the next morning. I found someone. My pulse jumped. A retired nurse, one who worked at the clinic during the year I was born. According to Marianne, the woman was still alive, still living outside Denver. And for years she had refused interviews, refused reporters, refused everyone. Until now. 3 days later, we met her. Her name was Evelyn Grant, 78 years old, sharp memory, sharp eyes. The moment she saw my face, something changed. Not recognition. Regret. Deep regret. Then she whispered, "You have Rebecca's eyes." A chill ran through me. Evelyn explained that the clinic shut down years later after multiple complaints, missing files, questionable procedures, families asking questions, doctors blaming paperwork errors. But one case always haunted her. The night 2 women delivered baby girls. The same night I was born. Or thought I was. According to Evelyn, Rebecca wasn't the only mother there. Linda Parker was there too. My mother. Evelyn looked directly at me, then quietly said, "She desperately wanted a child." The room fell silent, because for the first time my mother's name wasn't appearing beside a coincidence. It was appearing inside the story itself. Evelyn remembered something strange. Each newborn received a file number, sequential, organized, routine. Except one file vanished, one number disappeared completely. No explanation, no record, no replacement, just a gap. And somehow that missing number matched the date I was born. If one missing file could change your entire identity, would you keep searching? Comment, I need the truth. Before we left, Evelyn handed Marianne a small cardboard box. She'd kept it for decades. Inside were old notes, shift schedules, memos, photographs, the kind of things nobody thinks matter until years later. Then I found a photograph. A different one, taken inside the clinic. Rebecca was in a wheelchair, crying, looking toward a nursery window, and standing in the background, watching her, was my mother, Linda Parker. For the first time in my life, I started wondering if my mother knew far more than she'd ever admitted. I couldn't stop staring at the picture. Rebecca was crying, the nurse was looking away, and my mother stood in the background, watching, not smiling, not comforting anyone, just watching. The photo wasn't proof of anything, but it raised a question I could no longer ignore. Why was Linda Parker there? I flew back to Denver 2 days later. The entire flight felt different from the first one, because 30 years earlier, 2 women had entered the same clinic. One left believing her baby died. The other left with me. And somehow my mother expected those facts to never collide. She was wrong. The moment I arrived home, I went looking. Not for evidence. For answers. Our house had a small attic above the garage. Mom stored everything there. Old boxes, holiday decorations, family albums, memories, and maybe secrets. I started opening containers one by one. 3 hours later, I found it. A yellow baby blanket, folded carefully inside a storage box. My hands froze, because the blanket looked identical to the one in Marianne's photograph. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Then I noticed something stitched into the corner. R.C. Rebecca Cole. Beneath the blanket sat an envelope. Old, yellowed, sealed years ago. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Every single one addressed to Linda Parker, and everyone signed Rebecca. My stomach dropped, because Mom hadn't told the truth. She knew Rebecca existed. I sat on the attic floor reading, letter after letter. Rebecca begging for information, asking questions, describing dreams about her daughter, promising she'd never stop looking. One letter was opened, then another, then another. Meaning Mom had read them, all of them, and never responded. That night I confronted my father. For the first time, he didn't deny anything. He looked exhausted, defeated. Then quietly said, "I thought the adoption was legal." The word hit me immediately. Adoption. Not birth. Not daughter. Adoption. He'd never used that word before, not once. Dad finally admitted what happened. 30 years earlier, he and Mom desperately wanted a child. The clinic offered a private arrangement. Fast. Confidential. No waiting lists. No agencies. Dad paid cash. A lot of cash. Then he was told paperwork would arrive later. It never did. And somehow they convinced themselves not to ask questions. But Dad revealed something even worse. Years later, Mom discovered Rebecca's letters. She learned the baby she raised might not have been legally adopted at all. She learned another woman was searching, another mother, another family, and she chose silence. Every year. For decades. That choice changed everything. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Mom opened the door. The moment she saw my face, she knew. I held up Rebecca's letters, the yellow blanket, the photograph. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then tears filled her eyes, and she whispered the words I'd been waiting to hear. I knew. Everything inside me went cold, because after weeks of questions, I finally had my answer. And now I needed the whole truth. Mom sat down before I could say another word. She looked smaller somehow. Older. Not because of age, because of guilt. For 30 years, she'd carried a secret, and now it was standing in front of her. Looking back. "I knew," she repeated. Then she started crying. Not dramatic tears, the kind that come from knowing there are no more places left to hide. According to Mom, she didn't know the truth at first. When the clinic called, she believed everything was legal. Everything. The doctors told her a young mother couldn't keep her baby, that arrangements had been made, that the child needed a home. She wanted to believe it. So she did. Until Rebecca's first letter arrived. Then another. Then another. And suddenly she knew something was wrong. What happened after the letters came? My voice barely sounded like my own. Mom looked down. Long silence. Then she answered. I was afraid. Afraid. One word. One decision. One lifetime of consequences. Because every year after that, she chose silence. Again. And again. And again. Then Mom revealed something I wasn't prepared to hear. Rebecca came to our house once. Actually came. My heart stopped. What? Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knocked on the door. The room spun, because all these years, I'd imagined Rebecca searching from far away, not standing outside my home, not close enough to touch the door. Rebecca wasn't angry. She wasn't screaming. According to Mom, she simply asked questions, asked if there had been a mistake, asked if anyone would speak with her, asked if she could see me. I was 6 years old, playing inside, only a few feet away, and Mom never opened the door. That truth hurt more than anything else. A week later, I met Marianne again. This time, there were no photographs, no theories, no mysteries, only truth. We completed a DNA test together, then waited. The longest 3 weeks of my life. Part of me hoped Marianne was wrong. Part of me already knew she wasn't. The results arrived on a Thursday morning. I opened them alone, hands shaking, heart pounding. One line changed everything. Close biological relationship confirmed. Marianne wasn't a stranger. She was my aunt. My biological aunt. And just like that, 30 years of assumptions disappeared. Linda Parker wasn't my biological mother. Neither was Dad my biological father. My entire origin story changed in a single sentence. A month later, Marianne handed me something she'd protected for years. Rebecca's final letter. The last one she ever wrote. I opened it carefully. Inside was a message written before she died. Not angry, not bitter. Hopeful. One sentence shattered me completely. If my daughter is alive, tell her I never stopped looking. I cried harder than I had since this journey began. Because for the first time, I knew the truth. I wasn't abandoned. I was lost. There's a difference. People assume I cut Linda out of my life. I didn't. Life isn't that simple. She raised me, read bedtime stories, helped with homework, sat through fevers and heartbreaks. Those memories were real. But so is Rebecca. So is Marianne. So is the truth. And I refuse to erase one woman to protect another. For the first time, the story belonged to me, not to the people who hid it. A year after that flight, I visited Rebecca's grave. I brought yellow flowers, and the photograph Marianne carried for 3 decades. I sat there for a long time, talking to someone who never got the chance to hear my voice. Then I thanked her. Not because she found me, because she never stopped trying. The woman who sat beside me on that flight didn't destroy my life. She restored it. She gave me back a missing chapter nobody thought I'd ever read. My mother believed this secret would stay buried forever. Instead, it crossed the country in seat 14B and landed beside me. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives as a stranger carrying an old photograph, and a promise made by a mother who never stopped looking.